who is an Evanston resident and who works really hard on issues of race and equity, and also on gun violence issues. And Karla, we met, I remember about 2 years ago, we met right on the corner. We're at Gibbs Morrison right now, and we met on the corner of Church and Dodge about 2 years ago.
Do you remember my sign? It's not enough to race against hate. I said you have to race towards equity.
And ever since then, our paths have crossed many, many times. So we both went to Springfield to lobby for sensible gun laws with Moms Demand Action, and you facilitate the Dear Everson Racial Justice Book Group. So we have a lot in common in terms of our goals of pushing for equity and recognizing racism in where we live in Evanston. Another thing that we have in common is that we're both immigrants. And where we differ in being immigrants is where we're actually from. So,
and the perspective we bring.
And the perspective we bring, absolutely. And I remember you telling me that growing up in Trinidad, racism just wasn't anything on your mind because everyone pretty much was black.
Or black or Indian.
Black or Indian.
Yeah, and we do have a smaller percent of Chinese, and there's some influx from Venezuela, just being so close, but some Syrian, mix of everything. And so it wasn't only that racism wasn't a thing, but race just wasn't a thing that was spoken of. And I think I could best describe that as, if you were in Iceland or, Trump's favorite, Norway, right? And you wanted to describe somebody over there, you wouldn't say, oh, the white girl, because everybody's white. And so similarly in Trinidad, everybody's brown of some sort. I mean, quite frankly, I said it the other day, like, even our white folks are tan because it's hot all day, right? So they don't look like the folks here per se.
Right.
And so everybody's some shade of brown, and so we just didn't talk about it. It was so unremarkable.
And on my side, I grew up in South Africa where race was the one and only issue that pretty much that defined my childhood
and what
the
think
country.
About it, South Africa back then.
And so it's very interesting because then you came to the States. When did you come to the States?
At 17.
At 17. And you came to go to university.
University of Mississippi.
Of all places.
Of all fine places.
And is that when your eyes were opened to?
No, they remained shut for a long time. If you grew up with a certain set of truths, right? I grew up in a country where race is not a thing. People don't treat you badly because of your race. Now, people might treat you badly, but that's because they're having a bad day or they're just mean. You can't just break that in a second. Again, I went to Mississippi in 1997. It's not like there were race riots and, that kind of stuff. It was still more subtle. And so I'm seeing things happening around me, but it is not in my life experience to associate that with race. The couple of things were obviously different. That back then described it as self-segregation. I was like, why all the black people sitting on this side of the cafeteria? All the white people. What's up with these sororities and fraternities? Which there's not one organization that I knew. I can't say one doesn't exist today, 20 years later in Trinidad. But as a kid growing up, there was not one organization I knew that you could join because of the color of your skin. It just didn't exist. And in fact, I was given a full scholarship to Tuskegee in Alabama because I wanted to first I wanted to study aeronautic engineering. I ended up settling for mechanical, but I had a full scholarship from Tuskegee in Alabama, and I turned it down because it was a black university. And I didn't understand the concept of any organization, because again, we don't study American history, that is you can join just because of the color of your skin. And so I opened the brochure and it says best black this and best black that, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't want to be the best black anything. I just want to be the best. Like, I don't understand, right? Because we didn't have a history of being excluded. We got our independence. Our first president was black. Like, our presidents, our prime ministers, my teachers, my principals, were black or Indian or brown, or some sort. And so I didn't understand being excluded because you were black.
So when did it occur? When did you suddenly say, whoa?
I don't think there could be a suddenly. Because it just, the pieces, you have to erase a whole life experience before that, 17 years. And so...
As did I.
Yes. So there were little bits. I think I looked at myself as a black person. In my mind, I told myself, I see it in so many immigrants today who are here for a shorter time. They're like, look, I'm in control of my own destiny. Nobody can keep me back. I'm going to step out of that race stuff. I'm not sure what they're about over there. And I am just going to do my own thing, keep my head down, do the right thing, and I will get followed. And it was not going to affect me. And so there was a determination to turn a blind eye to it, because I was like, I didn't want to get involved. I was there, I was on a scholarship, I need to keep my scholarship, I need to get my degree and get working and make some money, period. And so I think one of the first conversations I had that this started to click for me was not even about race. I was driving down Lakeshore Drive, and a friend of mine said that I saw some homeless people on the street, and I just right along, they tend to sleep along Lakeshore Drive sometimes, and I thought to myself, I'm not saying that I couldn't be homeless. I'm like, there, but for the grace of God, go any of us, right? But I had this feeling that I'd get out of it. Like, I'd just get out of it. My friend looked at me and she said, you are bringing your experience, your set of skills, your achievements to that problem. And assuming that if you put yourself as you are today in that situation, you will get out. And she's like, no doubt you will get out. But now take somebody else's life experience. Parents who didn't support them, parents who didn't grow up to tell them they could be anything, a society that didn't support them, a society that constantly told them they weren't anything, somebody who's been to war, somebody who has mental illness, somebody, like, you're putting your set of circumstances there. And in that statement, which was, again, not about race, I almost understood instantaneously that because of my set of experience as a black person, we're not the same as African Americans, in that they were experiencing something totally different in the way I was moving through, coming here at 17. Right. And that was the connection that didn't even start with race, that kind of opened it up and made it happen for me.
So it was sort of like an aha moment that then led you down the path that you're going. Mm-hmm. Talk a little to me about coming to the States at the age of 17 as a black woman, seeing that African Americans, you're not African American, you see African Americans at one table and whites at another table. Where did you sit?
With the international students. So all of my friends from college are international, from Serbia, from Jamaica, from Malaysia, anywhere else but America. From an African American standpoint, I didn't seem right. I spoke differently. I didn't hold the same values. Many of the folks were first generation college students, and so they dressed to the hilt to go to class. And I was, I watched TV. I saw how kids went to college. I was in my pajama pants, like slushing along. And they were like, you're not holding up the image. I'm like, what image? I don't know. Did I sign a contract about an image that I was supposed to have?
So you didn't understand African Americans, and they didn't understand
me.
You. They didn't see you as, they saw you as black but other.
Yes, or trying to be white, because if it's not, especially in the South, where there, at least in Mississippi, there's not a huge population of Hispanic or Asian or other. It's black or white, and black comes in for them in kind of one form.
And so the white students,
a little bit of the exoticizing. Oh, that's so cool, and the ignorant statements. I had a girl tell me once, "You must have the most awesome bikinis in Trinidad." And I was like, yeah, you should see my Sunday church bikini. Like, yeah. Like, how did you boil my country down to bikinis? Like, what is wrong with you?
And so you're very involved in the community. You've lived in Evanston for how long?
6 years.
For 6 years. And what brought you to Evanston?
Having kids, looking for schools, choosing. For us, it was immediately about Evanston versus Oak Park, because we wanted a, quote unquote, like everybody else, diverse community. Ultimately the Evanston won because of the lake, and it was closer to Andersonville where we lived previously, and where still a good number of our friends were.
And before we talk about your community involvement, let me ask you about your family. So you're married, and you have 2 kids, and you're a mixed race family. Yeah,
we're a mixed race, same gender family, with adopted kids. So anything else we want to throw in there? Yeah, immigrants. From that perspective, Evanston has been great, just from being who we are and having it be okay and people not bat an eyelid. They might be talking, but no, not my concern. But to me, anyway, it hasn't been an issue.
And then if you were here for 6 years, when did you decide you were going to become involved in activism and race issues?
I think, my kids in general have been the catalyst for me. There was a point of realizing that this is different, realizing that there's systems in this country, realizing there's a history that still impacts today. But that wasn't enough before to kind of make me think that I need to make this a focus in my life. Once I had kids, I realized I had to do some learning of how to raise black children in this country. My mother didn't have to have the talk with me. My mother didn't have to tell me about what my skin meant and how my skin impacted people when they saw me in the world. Those are not conversations we had. So I had to study up pretty quickly to understand what it would take for me to raise my kids. And the more I looked and the more I saw how things impacted my kids. And when you look at your child and she's in pain because something was innocently said, but it doesn't have an innocent impact on her. And it made me realize that I had to do work to make sure the people around her were understanding the impact that their words have, and we're also working towards change.
Interesting. So even though you yourself walk around in a black skin, you had to learn, almost like a white person has to learn, to be anti-racist.
Yes, that's actually the main point of my book. It's because I think I have the unique experience of understanding blackness as an outsider in this country, which is the path that I would love all white people to go on, of understanding what it means to be black in this country. It is not about the color of your skin. And I had to do that as an adult. And so I feel like I have some insight into what it takes to make that journey even, a little extra insight, right? Because I got to experience it in some ways,
Absolutely.
But I got to make that cognitive shift as an adult.
And so tell me about your book. I knew you were writing a book, but I didn't realize that was what it was about.
Yes, so it's a little bit about me coming here and the dichotomy of black in Trinidad versus black here, as well as sort of my awakening and what I have learned and the key pieces that I think that have made the shift for me that I'm hoping will help make the shift for others.
It was having kids that sent you on this journey, and then as I said before, we've been involved in a lot of things together, but one of the things that you've just done is started this group called Evanston Skokie Parents Against Racism,
committed to anti-racism. Yes.
And I know right now you have about 274 people on the group, but it started like a month ago.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the goals of the group, what you hope to get out of it, what you hope other people get out of it.
So looking at other Facebook groups in Evanston as a parent here that we all kind of go to for whatever our various needs are, it was very clear to me that what was created by default was not a place or safe space for people of color. And you can tell that because you could see people of color there, but the conversation and the voices that are heard, it leaves out that, it doesn't leave out intentionally, but it creates a space where people of color, like, if I put my toe in that, it's not. So yeah, sure, they might comment on, anybody's got a good handyman, right? That's a safe space, but they're not going to share anything from their lives because the sense is that it's not going to be understood. And you could look at those and be in those all day long and not realize that. If you are not looking with a lens, if you're looking with a white lens, you may not even realize that we're not hearing the voices. And so we had two goals: to create a space where we were educating all parents, to educate the kids about race and racism. So it has to start with the parent getting knowledge first, and then we're constant. But it's a continuous, right? You can go to one training. It's like the sex talk these days. Back in the day, they told you had your sex talk with your kid, and it was over. Great. You know about the birds and bees? See ya. Now they tell you have to have it all the time. Similarly with race, you have to start having it from the time the kid could talk all the way up. There are different complications when that kid is 16 or 17. You keep having it all along. And so it was meant to be an ongoing. So instead of just like looking at a video and saying, oh, look at that racist over there in that video, how do you see parallels in what's happening today for us? Or look at this article, look at these 3 pieces. Share this little video with your child. Talk to them about what they see, what they notice. And it's kind of a constant ping for parents to do some own self-reflection and to make connections with their kids on different things, but as well as creating a safe space for people of color, which I think one of the most rewarding things, which somebody just posted a thank you yesterday on the site, is seeing people of color come up with their stories and knowing that they're not going to get like, why are you being so sensitive? Like, why is that a thing? Race has nothing to do with that. Like, why are you making this a thing? That their voices are going to be listened to and acknowledged in this group. And I've seen several people be willing and brave enough to share their story and know that it will be welcomed, and that means the world to me.
And that's from my perspective with Dear Evanston is elevating stories like that. So, because often those stories are not heard because they are not
and
told.
not validated.
And they're not
it's
validated.
It's not validated. Like, if you post about your experience and then see, nothing.
She's just complaining
or nothing.
Or nothing.
And nothing
Right.
to it.
Right.
That's a second hurt on top of the first hurt that happened. And so for people of color to know that they have a space that they could go share their frustration would be validated. And nobody's going to solve your problems. We can't, one person can't solve your problems, but just say, I hear you. Thank you for sharing that.
So the interesting thing about the group then is that on the one hand, you're trying to educate parents about racism and anti-racism so that they can talk to their kids. On the other hand, you're focusing specifically on people of color feeling comfortable. So what about white parents who may be at the beginning of their journey, their anti-racism journey? Are they welcome to the group, or is it specifically a group for people of color?
No, it's a group for everybody. You said on one hand and the other hand, and I will say these two hands are clasped. Because, and this is why it's a hard page to moderate. Because if there are things called white affinity groups, which sounds like a weird word. That word took a while to get to me because you have images of KKK, but it's not that. Right. It's actually a space so that white people can go and talk and question and figure out and grapple with issues of race without saying offensive things that can hurt people of color, hearing it over and over and over how you don't get it. Right? And so if you think that you still have some just general basics you need to grapple with, a white affinity group, which one does exist at Nichols, may be a good place for you because you're like, I want to be able to say these things. But if you want white parents to be able to learn about the experience of people of color and kids of color in this community, they can't learn about that firsthand from other white people. I always encourage, we're doing White Fragility soon by Robin DiAngelo, and I love that book. It's filled with so much science, and she studied it, and she studied for years. But we have a lot of books out there talking about race from a PhD perspective, right? From a doctorate in what it means to be black by a white person. Correct. There are other great books. So You Want to Talk About Race by Ijoma, blanking on her last name right now. But that is a perspective of what it means to be black by a black person. She doesn't have a PhD, but she has a life PhD in being black. And so we have to balance having people of color in the room to share their experience so it could be fully understood by white people, but at the same time, not have people say things that are then going to be offensive and punish the people of color for sharing their experience. And so, we have a rule in our site that there's no tone policing and there's no diversionary tactics, meaning somebody shares their story or shares, serious issues about race and you nitpick on a piece of humor here, or you nitpick on it wasn't said with the right tone. The point is we're here to be about anti-racism. And if you want to talk about something else, this is not the place for it. So if you want to take away from the conversation of anti-racism, then that's not going to be welcome. And so it is a fine line to walk, but those are not two hands. It has to be together because you can't get a full understanding without people of color in the room.
So would you encourage Evanstonians who are interested in not only people who are already invested, but people who are looking to become invested? Would you encourage them to join your group?
I would encourage them to join your group. Encourage them to read the rules, and I'll encourage them to listen for a while. Listen, see how other people are. The tone is set differently in this group than just a random other group, and so to look how people are communicating and see. We're fighting really hard to create a certain type of community in here.
You talked about coming to the States and learning about the divide, the racial divide. And one of the things, and I came to the States and from my perspective thought I was coming to a nirvana compared to South Africa, and then I learned about the racial divide. And one of the things that I learned pretty recently when I was in Leadership Evanston, one of my friends at Leadership Evanston, Melissa Blunt, I interviewed her for Dear Evanston, and she told me that the problem with race was white supremacy, and I nearly fell off the chair. As much as I was already on the journey, and I worked at the Anti-Defamation League in my 20s. So white supremacy to me was the KKK, it was, the Michigan militia, it was really virulent, out there white racist groups. And for me to learn the word white supremacy and understand it as an institutionalized issue was such a big leap, and it put everything into a perspective for me to understand. And I think that so many white people who want to walk the walk of being anti-racist, or at least want to try to understand it, get very turned off by that word. And I think as it becomes more used and reframed, I think that's a really important step, and a step to say to white people, it's about institutional racism. It's about the very foundations of this country. It's not about. It's also about the extremists.
There is probably an unconscious desire to keep it as being about the extremists, so everybody could say, yes, it's
not
all
me.
Racism is because of those few bad people over there.
It's not.
And I'm not participating, and I'm
Absolutely.
not gaining from it, and I don't want this. And I just wrote a piece that was called "Redefining Racism and White Supremacy," redefining your limited view of racism and white
That's
supremacy.
right.
And in teaching, I teach classes on race and racism, and in teaching, I found that the use of the word white supremacy as a description of our society, a white supremacist society, was the one thing that even in a room of people who were, fairly far along on their journey, meaning, and this journey is a never-ending journey. It's not like you get to get a certificate at the end and be like, I get it, I'm woke now.
Right.
But they were, they had been doing work when that word was used. I could see the eyebrows go up, like, what you talking about, Willis? And it's a societal thing. We have all bought into it, including Black people or different people of different races. And so in the piece I wrote, I showed a video of kids of a very young age being showed two colored dolls.
That's right.
And you have young kids who have they didn't grow up in, KKK families, where even Black kids are saying, that's the pretty doll, pointing to the white doll. Or that's the smart doll. And that's the mean doll, pointing to the Black doll. And so they're getting it because it's everywhere. The key questions I kind of asked in that is, what race is considered primarily beauty? What is the media sharing as what standard of beauty is? Who's considered the girl next door? Do you consider a little Korean girl? Does that pop to mind when you say girl next door? Who's considered non-threatening? Or who's considered threatening? And so if you ask these questions and the answer is always white, and the answer for many people of color sometimes is always white. Especially for those who grew up in a predominantly white or more white community. If you live in a predominantly Black community, it may not always be that way. We've all bought in. We've all bought in.
I think it's interesting. I just finished reading Michelle Obama's book, and she talks about growing up on the South Side and feeling like her community was great and fine, and she loved it. And then she went to school. She took a bus to school to Whitney Young, and she had to take it through downtown Chicago. And then she just saw this whole different world that woke her up to that. It's, when you grow up in your own community, that's the norm.
Yeah.
And I think that unfortunately that's also the norm for people who grow up in low-income, disadvantaged communities. It's so difficult to get out of that because that's your norm. You can't see further than where you're at.
Yeah. You don't have as many examples. I think that was one of the opening. I volunteered and taught robotics at a school in Inglewood many years ago, a high school. And I remember the first day I went to speak to the kids about the robotic competition and the scholarships available, and I'm there excited, and I bought pizza, and kids were coming in the room, grabbing pizza and walking out. Because when I told them that there were scholarships available to go to college, I could have as well been telling them they could go to Mars.
Exactly.
And I was so naive.
Frustrated.
No, I was naive to the realities of, who these kids were, because I grew up poor. But I had examples of people. My uncle went to college. My neighbors went to college. My neighbors' sons went to college. There were people around me.
And is that because of the country you grew up in?
Without a systemic and institutionalized system keeping people of a certain color down, then it is more of, nothing's perfect, right? But more of an even playing field where you feel like I am in control of my own destiny. If I study, if I work hard, that could be my ticket out because there are not other factors working against me. And so I was 13 when I decided I was getting out of there one way or the other. And I didn't have a plan. We sure didn't have the money to send me to college. And my first plan was being a flight attendant, because that's the first way I figured I could get off the island.
What made you at 13 decide you wanted out of there?
I got cable.
Seriously?
Similarly to Michelle Obama, leaving her small community and going to Whitney Young and seeing down like a whole different world downtown. Until I was like 11 or 12, we had one station, then we got two, and I was watching a lot of Matlock and Golden Girls and LA Law and all of that stuff, Cagney and Lacey. Only the 3 shows that showed that night, that was it. And then once we got cable, suddenly, and it's like not legal. We were paying legally, but
Right.
however it works, so you got like 200 stations. Like, it was just like whoosh, everything.
And that's why
Suddenly I saw a whole world, and I was like, what? All of that is out here?
Wow.
And so I didn't necessarily at that moment want to come to America. I wanted to see the world. I mean, there's so much stuff out there. And I figured a flight attendant, you can do it all you need is a high school degree. You need to speak another language, and I was studying French and Spanish. And back then, there were all these sexist rules, so I had heard and knew you had to be tall and beautiful and thin, and I was like, oh, you gotta lose a little bit of weight. And that was my quickest, easiest, money needing way to get off the island.
Interestingly enough, when I was growing up in South Africa, there was no TV. And the reason that there was no TV is South Africa, the government didn't want people to see
what's going on outside.
And we got TV when I was 14.
And that's what allowed me to dream and to think I wanted something beyond.
Talk a little bit for me about your work with District 65.
I'm not working as a whole with District 65, although we have 6 schools that are sponsoring a training that I'm doing next week, this coming Saturday, right? It's maybe 4 days away now, called how to talk to kids about race and racism. And I specifically named it race and racism because we always think race and we think negative. Like, there's so many lovely, joyous pieces of race and culture and things to celebrate. But today, when we say race in America, we're like, oh boy.
Right.
And so I originally started plan that class for Dewey, which is a school my kids go to, because there's been a rash of racist rhetoric going on. But we know that's happening
among
in
the
other schools,
children?
among the children and the younger group of children. And so people reached out from other schools saying, hey, we would love to be part of this as well. So we reached out to the PTAs, and it's now being sponsored by 6 different schools. And so the district has taken on, and they shared it in their Fast 5, and they're supportive of this work because, again, it is the responsibility of the district to have a clear policy and a way of dealing with these incidents when they happen. But these incidents are not created by the district, to be fair. Now, they can be perpetuated if they're not addressed, right? But these issues are created at home, and not in the same ways that everybody thinks. I am a firm believer that none of the things that were said in our school was because a parent sat and taught those kids that. What a parent didn't do was explicitly tell their kid there's a clear difference between the word stupid and the N-word, or stupid and calling a black child a monkey. And if we don't clearly teach our kids what those words are and how they need to stay away from them, they're going to hear it used one day somewhere, and they're going to hear it used in a mean way, as a burn, as they would say these days, and they're going to think it's just like any other burn out there, and they're going to use it because they heard it in a mean tone and they want to be mean in this moment. And all kids are mean at some point in time.
Right.
They want to be mean in this moment without realizing the extra weight that carries. And I had somebody tell me the other day, oh, well, all our kids have been bullied. All our kids have been mean things. And I was like, not for 1 second. Tell me.
Wait.
Yeah, calling a kid a mean word like stupid or, is the same thing. They're protected classes in this country for a reason. So we're happy to see that the district is standing behind the work that we're doing.
And you said that there has been a recent rash of slurs thrown around by children. Is it a new phenomenon, or has it been going on for a long time and we're just sort of more aware and wanting to address this stuff?
I honestly don't know. My kids are in 2nd grade. I have not been in the 2nd grade and kindergarten. I haven't been in the school system long enough. I am sure it is not the first time this has been said. But what I'm positive right now, especially I can speak for our school at Dewey, there's a set of PTA parents and parents in general who are not going to sit by and just let this continue. They're going to take action.
I was just wondering whether it, maybe there's been exacerbation of it, just like there's been with anti-Semitism and racism around the country and anti-Muslim sentiment around the country because of our current national leadership. So,
and there are all sorts of levels of it, right? There's one of the comments made was that all black people are stupid, right?
There was a kid's comment.
That is not, hey, I called you a monkey and I didn't really know the history of the, whatever.
Right.
That's a clear statement that, again, if you don't talk to your kids, which I am not purporting that kid heard there's a statistic that says by the age of 5, kids will have already picked up racial biases, and they don't always line up with the thinking of their parents. So they don't have it's not like they can see different color skin. They've already picked up biases. Between 3 and 5, they figure out that people are treated differently by the color of their skin.
And so they follow suit.
Right? And so unless you are counteracting what society is giving like oxygen, you're going to end up with a kid who's going to say the wrong thing.
So talk to me a little bit about implicit bias.
Implicit bias is, these prejudices that we pick up unaware that we're even taking them in. For instance, if you live in a community where the people you see serving are brown and black people, the people who are working the lunchroom, the people who serve you when you go to a restaurant, the people who serve you if you go to McDonald's, wherever, you're starting to slowly pick up. Marry that certain people are in service, and then you marry that with who's the principal of my school? What do most of the teachers look like? What does the president look like? You're starting to pick up, all the people in power look like a certain thing. And that quickly, repeatedly, different examples then tell you that it's built a different way.
And you're not even aware of it.
And you're not even aware that your brain is processing these pieces of information. I think what I would say to anybody who's interested in doing this work, one of the first things you need to learn, and it's the thing I put in every one of the trainings I do, how to apologize when you make a bad step. It's like you don't know what you don't know. I can't tell you how many things I said when I first came to this country that were, very prejudiced at the very least, because I just didn't know what I didn't know. And so, and you could be woke to a point, wokish, they should start a new show instead of blackish, wokish. And then there's another nuance. Racism is deep, and hence the layers of the ways you can step in it are deep. And so if anybody dedicating themselves to this work needs to understand that I'm going to step in it, and when I do, even if I don't understand how yet, and that wasn't my intention, and I repeat all the time, racism is not about the intention with which the thing was said or done, it's the impact that it had on the oppressed group or the person of color. It is not about the intention. And so regardless of your intentions going into it, it's just learning to say, you know what, that was my bad.
Right.
And I mean, nothing diffuses a situation like, dude,
an apology.
My bad. I own that. Now you can't drop the N-word and then say my bad, right?
Right.
I mean, as an adult. I was thinking about how we open our training this week is, if parents are here just so they don't get embarrassed when their kid is the next kid to drop the N-word, they're here because it's, to me, this is not 1970. The goals here are not about keeping not saying the N-word or not saying a slur. That is not the ultimate goal.
We've been there, done that.
Yeah, this is 2019. We are so past this. My goal is making sure that the kids that my daughters are surrounded by are gonna have their back. Not only not gonna call them the N-word. That is the least of my problems. Right?
That's the lowest.
That's the lowest bar. But when my kids are 12 and they're playing and a cop comes by, that white kid's not gonna take off and go running. That white kid understands that the mere presence next to my black child changes the outcome, makes the outcome better. And so that is why I do the work that I do. That is why, because if my kids are gonna grow up in a community that's majority white, those better be some progressive and truly progressive. Not progressive, full stop, I moved to Evanston, I'm progressive. Right. But constantly on the journey, constantly pushing forward and have my kids back.